that's not even the only abortion-related case that we have coming up at the court this term. We've got the EMTALA litigation that I've been covering. It was sort of the case that before anybody was covering it, that I was like watching these dueling lawsuits in both Idaho and Texas, and now we have the Idaho case that's going to be in this April argument sitting. It is, I guess, like, obviously, I'll be getting more into it as we get into that case, but what is the contextualization between the two cases? Is there any reason, any way that people should be looking at these as related? I mean, obviously, they both relate to how the Biden administration is dealing with a post-Roe landscape, and I just, while I had the three of you on on the line, as it were, I thought I would ask, like, how have you all been thinking about that case and how it fits into this bigger discussion, and how it matters?
So I would defer to Greer because I feel like she has a piece coming out in Duke Law Journal that is the definitive piece on abortion definitions. Like it is the piece to tell you what.
Rachel is my hype girl tonight.
No,
It's just so sweet.
no, but it's true. It's true. But I feel like that's the place to look for what's happening in the EMTALA, because I am a comparativist by heart, and I think that there's a lot of room for interpreting in some places, not Texas, exceptions broadly. Like I think
Mhm.
there are lots of examples of lots of places where life became health, health became mental health became socioeconomic circumstances, and that I'm an eternal optimist about that. But I think there are real dangers in putting your eggs in that basket in this country because the laws are so badly written. They are so terrible for, the entities that have to interpret them and the Supreme Courts in states that are going to apply them. We have a long way to go. And I see that as very different than the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine litigation, which touches on not so much preemption and not so much definition, but federal power and the
Right.
the role of an agency to determine a drug's safety. So I think Comstock is a huge, like I raised my hand. Um, but I also think that this is part and parcel of a Supreme Court agenda that says we just don't believe the FDA. Like when
Mhm.
they said in 2021 that picking up mifepristone is safe at a healthcare facility without some kind of, like suspending that rule of the 20,000 drugs that we regulate, we don't need you to pick it up and take it by yourself at the same time. Um, I think there's a lot going on there that's different than the definition of abortion and the definition of exceptions.
Mhm.
They are related, but I think they are chipping away at a different source of power for the federal government.
And Greer, what is that power?
Um, you know, obviously the three of us in our very first paper together were writing about hoping and trying to push the Biden administration to do more, right? And in some sense, the EMTALA litigation really came, not to say that we were the only reasons that that the Biden administration, pursued EMTALA. We certainly weren't, but that was one of the things that Biden has been able to do, right? I think the thing that's really important to note here is that EMTALA is the most narrow possible victory, right? So like what Biden's administration is trying to do through this federal law is is literally expand the small number of states that only have a life exception, but no health exception, into a health exception. But in all of the states with a health exception, it's this exceptionally narrow health exception, right? So we're talking about the smallest number of abortions you can really imagine in every state. Like that is what this lawsuit concerns. So for the mifepristone case, we're talking about huge implications, like David said, right? Like huge numbers.
Right.
With EMTALA, this, in my opinion, this case is also, it's like mostly symbolic, right? It's like, can you expect to be taken care of and, have some sense of safety if you're pregnant in this country, no matter where you live? Like,
well, and that's, I mean, for me, when I started reading, I mean, basically when Alliance Defending Freedom started joining in the Idaho briefs, they got much more aggressive, and that stay request brief was downright absurd at points, and was just, I mean, to me, just seemed like that was my thought, was if they're fighting this hard for this, like what would they do with something more extreme, not even more extreme, more broad?
I also think that the alliance litigation it wants to throw up, like, it is about standing and it is about FDA power. It's about all those things. But it's also just a contestation of facts. Like, none of these studies matter. They were misread, they were misinterpreted for the last 20 years. And EMTALA, like the Texas brief, it's not wrong that, like Greer said, EMTALA is not a very progressive piece of legislation.
Right.
It actually was meant to prevent patient dumping, and the argument that it doesn't necessarily give a platform for a state to require a certain kind of medical care. Look, I don't agree with the argument, but it's an argument. Like, it's not the kind of argument in the AHM litigation where I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, I don't even know where that argument comes from. The EMTALA litigation is a little different in that way, without, trying to bolster the anti-abortion argument for EMTALA application. But at least it's plausible that that is an interpretation that you can disagree with for EMTALA, where the FDA's approval in 2000, and how, we go into this in our paper, and how they have read what the FDA did under its then powers under subpart H, is just, it's crazy town.
And to your point, Chris, too, from earlier, one of my big errors of judgment from Dobbs, right, was that right after Dobbs, I remember being like, well, no one's going to challenge Biden's EMTALA policy. I mean, I remember I said that on Twitter, and I had Liz Sepper wrote on Twitter and was like, you're wrong, you're just wrong. And I was like, really? Like, you really think she knew Texas better than me? And she
Well, Texas had teed it up. They'd already written their own medical emergency provision that contradicted EMTALA. Like, they were ready for the fight.
And it's obviously not even just this EMTALA. We've all been writing about and responding to the IVF ruling in Alabama. We have this Title 10 ruling out of the Fifth Circuit that came out of another Matt Kaczmarek ruling relating to contraception availability that came down on March 12th. These rulings are going to keep coming regarding abortion, reproductive rights. To sort of just close, we can do another round robin, and hopefully we'll start on the other side this time. I guess what are you thinking about as the next issue that people aren't yet talking about or aren't talking about enough that you think is going to become an issue either before the election or potentially right after the election if Trump were to win?
So I think every 4 years, I have the same answer, which is that the Democrats are not talking about the Supreme Court justices enough and appointing them, because right now we have Alito and Thomas are in their mid 70s. Obviously, we have no idea how much longer they're going to be on the court, but we do have a good sense that probably if Trump wins, they probably are going to retire so that they can be replaced by someone who's 28 and be on the court for another 70 years. So at the very least, there's importance it's important to think about their ages to try and make sure they don't have the opportunity to voluntarily step down at a favorable point in time and be replaced by someone who's probably more conservative than them, believe it or not, and much younger. But on the other hand, there's also the opportunity that with a Democratic president for another 4 or 8 years, that we could get a retirement that is not a voluntarily, not one where they planned retirement, or an opening on the court. And I don't think the Democrats ever talk about that enough. The Republicans do. They're very good about that. But the Democrats don't. And so I think we need to be talking about the fact that the Supreme Court, yes, we have lost it right now. Yes, it's a 6-3 majority. That's very conservative, but it's not going to be that way forever. And if we talk about it as forever, we're doing ourselves a disservice because we don't know when that will change. And we need to make that an election issue every 4 years. And it's not right now, I can't recall a Democratic, I can't recall Biden or Harris talking about the fact that we've got 2 justices who are probably going to retire if Trump wins.
Rachel?
I think we have a critical mass of states that have passed shield laws, which are really important, 17 states. And they do a lot of important and crucial work in protecting people who are providing services. And, I got to give a hat tip to David, who really was the engineer of that in our paper, who thought about how that would work and why, and has been really, a tireless advocate for reasons that have all been for the good of abortion access. And I think that the 3 of us are thinking about what comes next. So just like Comstock, I don't think there's any advantage in putting your hand in the sand and saying like, oh yeah, these laws are just going to exist and they're never going to be challenged and no one's ever going to be sued and nothing's ever going to happen and they're just going to exist. And so I think the next challenge for us as scholars and advocates and lawyers is to start being proactive about what we're going to do to implement these shield laws and how we're going to do it effectively. And that means talking about the standard of care. It means talking about telehealth regulations. It means being on the offensive of what comes next, because like the playbook, like there's somebody else on another webinar, like on another Zoom cast who's already having the same conversation about what they're going to do in response to shield laws. And so for me, that's where I'm focused, because I think that litigation is important. I think the Supreme Court's important, but I think more important is how we safeguard access in real-time ways that allow providers and patients to feel safe.
And finally, Greer.
So, I mean, obviously Comstock, but we already talked about that. So I would say the thing that I think a lot about, and I've seen a lot of movement in this direction, I would say particularly the last year, but I would love to see more and more focus on integrating abortion into a greater suite of reproductive justice issues, right? I think in some sense, the Alabama decision related to IVF was one step that really drove that conversation forward, right? It's not just abortion, it's also fertility care, but we have to always be talking about it also with our maternal mortality crisis, which is shocking and insane. And also with the fact that we have one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have paid maternity leave, parental leave. And, you know, like, and, right. Pregnancy loss in this country is terrible. And you know, so what's next? I would really like, I think the country is coming to terms with the truth, which is that abortion is part of comprehensive reproductive health care. The only way you have healthy families is with abortion. But making that case more fully is, I think, going to be something that happens over the next, you know, decade.
Thank
And
you
actually,
all. Yeah,
I just want to
David.
throw in one more thing we didn't talk about, and I'll just be quick, is the ballot initiatives in November. You know, abortion rights ballot initiatives are undefeated post-Dobbs. It's 7-0, 8-0 if you add in the Wisconsin Supreme Court justice, who was really, that was all about abortion. And it's in some very conservative states. There are going to be many more ballot initiatives in November. And so it'll be very interesting and to watch what happens if that continues, if that streak continues to, and if the American people continue to basically say, at least when this is a one issue vote, we are absolutely pro-choice. And so far we've seen that. And I'm hoping that streak continues in November. So I think that's a big part that we have to be watching too.
As an Ohioan who has been faced with increasing ignominy for my state, I will say that I had held up hope the entire time, and when they came through, both times that the Republicans tried to stop them there, I was that was a point of personal pride. So thank you.
And Greer shares your pride as a Kansan with her, because Kansas was the first.
They were the first one. Well, thank you so much, Rachel and Greer and David. I always immediately click on the link when there's the trio has a new op-ed. What are they on now? And I just think that you all bring both careful work to these discussions, as well as really diving into the issues before other people are quite on the same page. So I really appreciate your work and appreciate your time today.
Well, we're lucky to work together. We kind of love each other a lot. And thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.